A man who was detained in a raid related to the Nancy Guthrie investigation says he knows nothing. The sheriff of Pima County says that man has not been cleared as a suspect in the case of the missing 84-year-old mom of Today Show host Savannah Guthrie. We are learning more as well about the high-tech potential answer to the question of who is in Nancy Guthrie's house as days of searching have turned into weeks. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Hey guys, thanks so much for following this case with us. We are able to bring you this story because of our incredible partner, Morgan & Morgan. There is a reason why On the Case is one of the top true crime shows on YouTube, and there is a reason why Morgan & Morgan is America's largest injury law firm. For more than 35 years, they've been fighting for the people and have recovered more than $30 billion for their clients. The proof is in their track record. With more than 1,000 lawyers across 100 offices nationwide, hiring Morgan & Morgan is like hiring an army to go into battle for you, a team that will fight hard to get their clients the compensation they deserve. Not all law firms are the same. If you hire the wrong one, you may be beat before you even start. If you are ever injured, you can check out Morgan & Morgan, and their fee is free unless you win. For more information, you can go to forthepeople.com/OTC. You can click the link below or scan the QR code on your screen. There are some moments as this case has gone on, and I don't know if you feel this way, where it just feels like investigators are getting so close, and the closure in this case that so many people want for the Guthrie family, that it could be coming. But then there's moments where there are pieces of this investigation that you learn that really worry you, that law enforcement may have a ways to go. Today, the FBI announced it's received nearly 20,000 tips since Nancy Guthrie went missing on February 1st. The Pima County Sheriff, in an interview with NBC News, said in total, between the FBI and the Pima County Sheriff, they have received roughly 50,000 tips. That is a lot of information to work through. And now we're hearing from a man who was detained in the raid on his house roughly a week ago. This was the person who was pulled over in a traffic stop in Tucson near a Culver's. He wasn't arrested. He was detained, questioned, and released, but now he's releasing a statement through his attorney. He's a 37-year-old man. He was detained when law enforcement served those two federally approved search warrants, one of them during that traffic stop when they pulled him over in a Range Rover, and the other one took place at his home where he lives with his 77-year-old mom. And the address for this person, it is to a home that's worth roughly $1 million. It is in a very nice neighborhood about 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's house. An Arizona law firm released a statement to 12 News in Phoenix, identifying their client by name as Luke Daly. The law firm says it can confirm that Luke Daly was the subject of two search warrants issued and served on February 13th, 2026. Mr. Daly and his mother were both detained by law enforcement while the search warrants were being executed. Neither Mr. Daly or any other. Mr. Daly has no link whatsoever to Nancy Guthrie and has no information related to her kidnapping. Like the entire Tucson community, both Mr. Daly and his mother are hopeful that Nancy will be returned to her family unharmed. Now, the man was detained. He was released. This was on the night of the 13th when a SWAT team went into his home. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos, who recently put out a statement that cleared the Guthrie family of their involvement, though the FBI won't comment on that, as well as a statement that cleared the spouses of the Guthrie family. But Nanos had this to say when he was asked about Daly, who he actually referred to as a person of interest. And the question was whether he had been cleared in this case. Nanos told 12 News, quote, "Per our court order, we had to search the homes. Those homes, people are inside them, family, friends, whatever. We can't have them there. While we search, are they being detained? Of course not. They're free to leave, but they can't be in the home. We knew we were looking for one person at that home, and the other person we're looking for is Nancy. Nancy wasn't there. The person of interest gave us a statement, gave us his whatever the warrant was for, maybe petition for physical characteristics of buccal swabs or photos or finger. We got everything we needed, and he is set free now. Does that mean he's not a suspect any longer? No. We'll do our work. We've got evidence to process from the home. What if we find Nancy's DNA in that home, right? Now, again, that was an answer in a one-on-one interview with 12 News, and the sheriff, of course, speaking very conversationally there. It is unclear if any DNA was found inside the home of Daly. But again, his law firm, his lawyer, releasing that statement saying that he has nothing to do, has no knowledge of what happened to Nancy Guthrie. Now, you can obviously, though, read that in a lot of different ways. We do know that this week law enforcement has been going to gun stores in the Tucson area. They've reportedly had a list of names and pictures, asking if any of the people on that list look familiar to the owners as customers from over the last year. We're also still waiting to hear on whether a DNA sample found inside Nancy's house could be the smoking gun that we are hoping for. We don't know what that sample is, but we do know it did not match Nancy. It did not match her family or people close to her. When it was put into CODIS, the FBI's database of people who have been arrested or convicted in previous cases, it didn't match. But that doesn't mean that the DNA is worthless, because CODIS actually only has about a 4 to 6% group of the population in that database. Now, the Pima County Sheriff says that investigators are now using what's called genetic genealogy to try and identify the DNA sample that they have from Nancy's house. We talked about one of the cases yesterday where we have seen that technology work in solving cases that may be at risk of going cold. It is the process of taking a DNA sample and then identifying the person based off their ancestry and matching it up with people in their family tree. They go into databases like 23andMe and they see if they can find any characteristics that maybe a third or fourth cousin might have. And again, it has been very successful in a lot of cases. Now, this is the arrest video of a man named Victor Antonio Martinez Hernandez. This is a case that is unrelated to Nancy Guthrie, but genetic genealogy was able to help solve it. Martinez Hernandez is a murderer. In August of 2023, he raped and killed a woman named Rachel Morin in Maryland. Morin was a 37-year-old mom of 5, and she was just out for a jog on a trail. Martinez Hernandez was in the United States illegally. He fled his native El Salvador after a warrant was issued for his arrest for murder there. When law enforcement put the DNA sample from the murder scene in Maryland into CODIS, there was no match. So you see the similarity there to the Guthrie case. Martinez Hernandez was not in CODIS because he didn't have a criminal record in the United States at that point. But genetic genealogy helped them look at ancestry markers, and they built out a family tree, and eventually they were able to track him down, and they found him 10 months after Rachel Morin's murder outside a bar in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
21 for 20 back.
Martinez Hernandez is serving life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now, another major case where genetic genealogy brought a case to a conclusion was the infamous Golden State Killer. In fact, this is kind of the case that put the method in the public sphere. California law enforcement had dozens of rapes and more than a dozen murders that went unsolved for decades. They were from the 70s and the 80s, but they did hold on to DNA samples. When they went into CODIS, didn't hit. As genetic genealogy came available, law enforcement compared their samples to the samples in GED Match, which is a public DNA platform that people use to build out their family trees. They didn't get a direct match to their suspect, but they found distant cousins of the man they would eventually arrest, and they were able to identify Joseph D'Angelo. He's a former police officer, and he is the Golden State Killer. He was arrested in 2018. He is now 80 years old. He's still alive, and he's serving 13 consecutive life sentences. Law enforcement say he committed dozens of rapes, but because of the statute of limitation rules in California, he could not be tried for those rapes. Now, turning back to the Nancy Guthrie investigation, of course, this case, very different from the two we were just talking about. We don't know where Nancy Guthrie is. The truth is, we don't know if she is still alive. But the fact that law enforcement have a sample from her home that doesn't belong to her, doesn't belong to her family, it could be the clue that cracks this case. Now, the sheriff has also gone on record saying that he believes the person who is seen on the front steps of Nancy Guthrie's house, they may not be the only person involved in this. He says they are not ruling out the possibility of there being more than one person, an accomplice in this case. It is unclear if law enforcement has more video than the images that they put out of that masked person armed with a gun on the front steps of Nancy's house. The sheriff says that he believes, though, that this crime was targeted, that the bad guy or guys knew who they were after. The sheriff in an interview called that a hunch. Now, another topic that has come up is the question of whether Nancy could be in Mexico. Now, you can get to the border pretty quickly from her house, less than 2 hours driving directly south. And this is what the border crossing looks like that is closest to Tucson. It's in Nogales, Arizona, and you can cross over into Nogales, Sonora, Mexico. A big wall there. You probably have seen this before because it's often used during political season as a backdrop for campaign speeches on immigration. It's also a very easy drive when you are going from the United States into Mexico. They really don't stop you. But it's important to note there are a ton of cameras at that border crossing watching every single vehicle that crosses into Mexico. Now, there are options outside of the area where there is that big wall where you could theoretically walk across the border into Mexico, but the terrain is very tough. It's very desert-like. It's not flat. And you have to wonder just how likely it would be that a kidnapper, if they had Nancy Guthrie, that she would make that trip. The FBI told CBS, though, they have been in touch with authorities in Mexico. The Pima County Sheriff has said there's no indication that Guthrie was brought across the border. I asked retired FBI agent Greg Rogers about whether he thinks this could be a search that crosses into Mexico.
No, I can assure you that the federales, the Mexican federal police, our counterparts, have been involved in this case from the get-go. I mean, literally from the very beginning, because just because of the proximity, how close Tucson is to the border. And again, as you've said, it's very easy to drive into Nogales. That's not, but there are cameras and there are plus, I can assure you from working years of cartel cases, the Mexican federal police have very close contact with the cartels. They have spoken with them about this, because if she were in Mexico, especially if she were in the Nogales area, the new generation cartel's very active there. They would know. Nothing goes on in cartel territory that they don't know about. And I'm not saying, I don't believe at all that this had anything to do with the cartels. I'm just saying they would know about it. And the Mexican federal police have been speaking with them about it, because nothing happens in an area they dominate that they don't know about.
The amount of money on the line for someone who has information to come forward in this case has gone up. You have the FBI offering $100,000 as a reward, and now Crime Stoppers is offering a reward of $100,000 after money was put up by a personal injury lawyer in Wisconsin. Joining us now to talk about this case once again is missing persons private investigator Steve Fisher. Thank you as always for being with us on Law and Crime. You know, today I had this like moment, because it's like day 18, where I felt like there are just these times where you feel like they're moving in, and, you know, maybe it was the raid on the home. You feel like, okay, here we go. They're getting close. But then you hear about, you know, going to gun shops with a list of, 24 to 40 names of people. And have you seen these folks before? And then you worry that maybe they're not that close, and they're really now 18 days out, 17 days, whatever it may be, that like they're really struggling to find the people who are responsible and to find Nancy. Like, what, just from what you're seeing as we all kind of just look from the outside, like, what do you think the state of this investigation is?
Well, like you said, it is hard to tell. And I realize, when you have those business visits going on where they're showing photos, and we know they're going and showing their surveillance video itself to other businesses. But They have said that they have 400 between agents and deputies and other investigators. They have 400 people working in this case. So even if they're zeroing in on somebody through the genealogy or through something that they learned in the search warrant executions, they're still going to have those other things going on just in case as a failsafe. So I don't necessarily think that's a sign that they don't have anything. But I'd be surprised if there's not any more search warrants, at least that we know of, served today. I definitely start getting a little bit more worried. I think it does just from the way they've postured. I think there's very different posturing between the very first search warrant of the guy Carlos down by Rio Rico, and the last search warrant that they served, plus on the Range Rover. It's they seem to be very clear that hey, Carlos, he has nothing to do with it. They keep saying we didn't arrest these people in the last one, but we're still processing evidence and whatnot, and that's a little different messaging. So it makes me wonder if maybe there is some link there. It might not mean that those people have any responsibility, but there is some link that's getting them to the next step.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where I think we have often covered a lot of success stories of when cases and people who are on the run are captured within the first 24 to 48 hours, and it's almost like we take it for granted. And now we're at 18 days out. Like in some of the missing persons cases that you have done, and I know this one is a little different than a lot of them. Like, what is it like when you get to day 18? Typically, like in one of these where, you worry, if we're still here a week from now, kind of doing the same thing and it's DNA going this and that, not saying that they aren't working hard and they aren't following leads and that something could break, but you do worry, like as time goes on, that this case is going to be more and more difficult to solve.
Yeah. And listen, this case isn't like the others. This one is very different, even for most experienced FBI agents. I mean, these ransom type of situations and kidnapping a 84-year-old woman just doesn't happen, but definitely been investigator in cases that have been high profile and gone a long time, like Kylie Rodney and Riley Strain in Nashville and some others, and this fatigue kind of sets in, where you start to see a lot of different theories, coming out from the public, which is fine, and law enforcement goes a little bit more silent. But that doesn't mean, in all those cases, it seemed like it was kind of hopeless. Like, oh my God, we've gotten to, Kylie's case, I think we're at 3 weeks or something, and it was like nothing was going to happen, and then boom, it does happen. And I do think that if they really had nothing. And I'm speaking about the FBI in particular here. If they had nothing, I think we would see some more public outreach, some more press conference type things. I do think they're digging in on some evidence, whether it be genealogy or DNA or witness statements or whatever it may be, surveillance that we don't know about. I do think they're digging in because they're not coming out in they want surveillance, but they're not coming out and they're having these regular press conferences saying we need the public's assistance,
Right. And it's only, and the FBI can be, they're not, they're very purposeful with what they release to the public, and sometimes they're very quiet on cases. The sheriff's done these one-on-one interviews. I'm not sure if that's by he's just more comfortable in that setting. I know he said he doesn't, like the press conference setting, which I know could be tough when everybody's yelling questions at you.
Yeah.
One thing you were tweeting about that I noticed, Steve, was related to this Adult Protective Services note. And this has been all over the internet.
Yeah.
I think Brian Enton with News Nation, you could see it on video there, that there was this like business card on Nancy Guthrie's front steps that, when the media was able to get access to the property while it was given back to the family, and then people walked up and took pictures. Like, what stands out to you that there was an APS business card and kind of the timing of it?
I think it's really important, and I actually wish there'd be more focus on it. When Brian Enton went up and shot that video, it was pretty much focused on the blood, which I understand, but I had zoomed in and I noticed this card was slid in the side of the door frame, and it's from the Arizona Adult Protective Services, which is a division of Arizona Department of Economic Security, I believe. But these investigators go out and they investigate reports of like elder abuse, exploitation, neglect, things like that. It appears something triggered an investigator to come out and do a door knock. And they come out and they visit the house, and then if nobody answers, they'll leave the card. Now, I brought this up on Twitter 10 days ago or whatever, and it kind of created some chatter, but then kind of died off. But actually, the question was asked to the sheriff in this last round of interviews he did, and he really brushed it off as, that was a neighbor that called because she was missing, and it generated them coming out to visit. Well, that maybe it's true. It makes no sense to me, though, because this was on a Sunday. She went missing. She's called in around noon. So that means that, and the sheriff said that he personally, because when they first arrived on scene, because of the blood and everything, they realized this was not just a missing persons case, it was more. So they brought out homicide. And he said he personally came out on Sunday, which he said was very rare. He's like, the sheriff doesn't normally come out to these scenes. Well, that means it was a crime scene right away. And why would a neighbor call Adult Protective Services, who's closed on Sunday, and file some sort of report when law enforcement's already there? And even if they did, the sheriff said that APS investigator left that card that same day on Sunday. So if that's true, why would they let this person walk through a crime scene where there's blood and actually physically touch the door and the window, which is where the ring cam was, to put this card in? It makes zero sense. And I think there's more to the story. I think it's something that I've asked the head of the Department of Economic Security, who is in charge of the Adult Protective Services, and they've got my email. They've opened it 14 times. They haven't gotten back to me. So I hope reporters will reach out to them and just say, they're not going to give the details of the case, and they shouldn't, but I think it's important to know whether that was left before, or did one of their investigators actually go walking through a crime scene? Because that's a real problem too, because that could be the foreign DNA. So, but I think it needs to be looked into, because somebody had a reason to contact them. Did they feel she was being financially exploited by somebody? She was like loaning money to somebody too much, or was an aide or caregiver or something, taking advantage of things? That could help lead us to what's going on.
Yeah, no. And it's interesting because it is something that's like, it's gotten some chatter, and the sheriff is brushing it off. But to your point, like, it's either going through a crime scene or there's something more to it. And we haven't really, the family has been cleared and their spouses, according to the sheriff. And so, that was after what seemed like very, in his words, they put them through the ringer, and like they took their cars, phones, whole thing, they went through it, and nothing came up there. But you do wonder, is that going to be something that we'll be talking about in the end of this? That was something that really mattered a lot in the end. So, it's good eye on your part in seeing that. Another thing I saw that you posted about was this signal sniffer. And I think of this pacemaker. And I just wonder, and I don't know a lot about pacemakers, but we know it disconnects from the iPhone. And then this new technology is trying to identify it. But just from the way it's been explained, it doesn't seem like it's the most, not to say it's not reliable, because I think it can work. It can be really valuable, but it doesn't seem like it's, this magical scanner that suddenly can say, here's a pacemaker if you're flying right over it.
Yeah, and it's not. Listen, it's a great piece of technology that we're using more and more in search and rescue. However, we're using them in environments like out in a forest or where we'll clear the searchers out so their personal devices aren't interfering, and then we'll run a helicopter or a drone over the area. And usually we're trying to signal sniff a low frequency cell phone signal. So even when your phone battery is dying or you doesn't have enough juice to make a call or text anymore, it still will for a while put out this really low frequency signal. We're usually hunting for that. However, this device will pick up any RF, which is radio frequency signal, and then it filters it down on the display. Like, okay, this is coming from a medical device, and because they all run, like pacemakers run in a certain frequency band. So it's great However, because these pacemakers need to last 5 or 7 years battery life, they put out a low power, short distance data transmission, and it only does it like every 3 or 4 minutes. So it's not a device that's meant to sweep an entire city with. It's really a device that's used more for if you know you've got somebody in a contained area like an avalanche or a forested area, or like a building collapse after an earthquake or something, and you can tell like kind of where people are. It's not meant for sweeping a city. However, in a case like this, I think it's fantastic that they're throwing everything they have at it. You got the resource to use it. You never know. So I don't fault them for using it.
No, and I think of all the resources that are going into this as the days go on, and it on one hand it shows you how hard it can be to solve certain cases. On the other hand, it is kind of a head scratcher where you have 400 FBI agents. Apple and Meta have reached out to help. You have this type of high-tech technology. The FBI is reaching out to authorities in Mexico to see if they've heard anything, and we're still looking for this person who a lot of people will look at and say does not appear to be like Jason Bourne, in terms of being the most sophisticated criminal in the world. And it's, and it probably is an example of like a real world check of just how hard it is to solve some of these crimes. Another piece of, this genetic genealogy DNA has had a ton of success in the Brian Koberger case. It worked in the Golden State Killer case. Rachel Morin was a murder out of Maryland that we talked about that, that played a role in tracking someone down who didn't show up in CODIS, like in this situation.
Yep.
Have you ever worked with any sort of, in any of your searches and tracking people down, like this type of DNA technology, and just how effective can it be in a situation like this where another day is going on and it doesn't appear that we have any suspects as of yet?
Yeah, I have. And listen, it's a shame that this foreign DNA, and I'm not talking about it from the glove. The DNA that was really important to me was the foreign DNA found in the house that was not hers or a known person to the family. That's super important. It's too bad that the person wasn't in CODIS, but I think they will get them through this genealogy. Companies like Orthram are changing the whole landscape. I mean, they are solving cold cases from 50 years. It's amazing what they can do now with this DNA technology. And it's not just Orthram. There's others. I don't know them by name, but Orthram's really just unbelievable how they've come on the scene and been able to solve these. And I think they were the ones responsible in a couple of cases you brought up. But I do think now it takes a little bit longer because they got to identify, relatives that are very distant. But I guarantee this is a top priority, and it's probably being worked on by many people at the same time, and so it'll cut that time down. Maybe we can get something within like the Koberger time frame. And I think this has probably been going on a little while, just because there was you had to go through quality control, which is a requirement if an outside lab is used to enter it in the CODIS. That doesn't mean that it wasn't immediately also sent to the labs and they started that process. So we could be 3-4 days away from, finding out who this person likely is. And I do think that if there's not more surveillance that's going to crack this, or one of these search warrants didn't turn up something that's really shows what happened, it's going to be the genealogy. And I think it'll be another, 4, 5, 6, 7 days.
Yeah. And you wonder too, just the way that they're talking about it and the fact that they've released it to the public makes you believe that it's more than just, maybe it's more than just like the pool cleaner's DNA or the gardener. And I know that those individuals hired help have submitted DNA already.
Yeah.
So for it to be, they don't know who it is.
So those would be known people to the family and the residents. So it's somebody outside of that, which is really interesting because listen, we've seen them show up. We've seen the pool guy show up. We've seen a couple other people show up. So she does have people that are there regularly, but those people all gave DNA as far as we know. So clears all them. So this being truly foreign DNA is really interesting because it doesn't sound like she had visitors outside of her family, and known friends. So I think this is going to be the person. And, it sounds, and unfortunately that probably means that there was somewhat of a struggle maybe inside the house and for them to be able to identify DNA from somebody else that person left that DNA. But we can hope for the best, but I do think that this person's going to be caught.
It feels like it. I mean, with all the resources going in, it just feels like that they, and in these cases too, like we probably don't know 95% of what they know at this point, especially with the FBI. They are so tight-lipped.
They anytime I've dealt with the FBI, they tell me they're like, we take your information, we will not share information with you. Right. And listen, they say the same thing to local law enforcement too. When they're the lead agency, they'll take all the evidence from the local law enforcement, but they share very little. They know a lot, and they very well may know who the person is now. It's just a matter of they're hunting that person down right now.
Right. No, and we'll see what plays out. Continue to watch it by the hour. Missing person private investigator Steve Fisher. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
If you have any information on Nancy Guthrie, you can contact the Pima County Sheriff at 520-351-4900. And you can also contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI or go to tips.fbi.gov. That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify, and we're also now streaming on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.